Deng Xiaoping, Opening China to the World, read and published by Mr. Books. As China emerged from the ashes of revolution and the shadows of isolation, it was Deng's pragmatic vision that unlocked doors, both at home and abroad, inviting a new era of engagement, ambition, and uncertainty. For most of the 20th century, China seemed to stand at a distance from the rest of the world, an ancient civilization closed behind a wall of ideology, conflict, and suspicion. The Communist Revolution in 1949 had promised new beginnings, but delivered decades of struggle. Mao Zedong's greatness and failings, reshaping a nation with both heroic zeal and tragic consequences. Into this crucible stepped Deng Xiaoping, a compact, unassuming figure whose resilience had been forged by years of political upheaval, persecution, and redemption. Deng's genius lay not in grand rhetoric, but in quiet determination and a refusal to be bound by dogma. Where others saw barriers, he glimpsed opportunity. Deng's philosophy was simple yet revolutionary. Let facts speak louder than words, and let results light the path forward. As he gradually assumed leadership roles in the late 1970s, Deng confronted the daunting legacies of the Cultural Revolution, economic stagnation, political distrust, and national trauma. But instead of closing China off, he did the unexpected. He opened it. The journey chronicled in this book takes readers through the myriad challenges Deng faced as he championed reform, both economic and political. How did a war-scarred, impoverished nation become the global engine we see today? What risks did Deng accept when he courted foreign investment, decentralization, and the unleashing of entrepreneurial spirit? And at what cost did this transformation come for both individuals and the soul of the nation? This book seeks to explore not only the monumental shifts Deng Xiaoping inspired, but also the complex, often painful human realities behind them. It is a story of leaders and followers, visionaries and doubters, triumph and tragedy. It is also the story of China's awakening, a nation learning, sometimes painfully, to look outward as well as inward. Let us embark on this empathetic journey, not only to honor Deng's achievements, but to understand the heart of a people who, under his guidance, opened their doors to the world for the first time in generations. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button to support the channel. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss an audiobook that could change your life. Now let's begin. Enjoy. Chapter 1. Prelude to Transformation. China. Before Deng. To grasp the magnitude of Deng Xiaoping's impact, one must first understand what China was before he ascended to power. The China of the mid-20th century was a land scarred by conflict, buffeted by poverty, and paralyzed by political uncertainty. Emerging from the decimation of World War II and the protracted struggle of the Chinese Civil War, China in 1949 was a tapestry of exhaustion. Mao Zedong's victory promised a bright future, but the road ahead proved far more tumultuous than anyone could have imagined. The early years of the People's Republic were defined by radical social engineering, the collectivization of agriculture, the push to eradicate old traditions, and the effort to create a new socialist man. Yet for all the energy poured into these endeavors, the costs were profound. One of the earliest and most devastating policies was the Great Leap Forward, 1958-1962. In pursuit of rapid industrialization and agricultural self-sufficiency, communal farming structures called people's communes were established. The campaign was characterized by enthusiastic slogans and ambitious quotas, but also by a profound disconnect between central planners and the realities in the countryside. Falsified production figures, mismanagement, and climatic disasters created a perfect storm. The result was one of the worst famines in human history, with tens of millions perishing in silence, their suffering hidden behind censored reports and political slogans. As if this trauma was not enough, China was soon swept by another maelstrom, the Cultural Revolution, 1966-1976. Mao, increasingly wary of the Communist Party bureaucracy and what he perceived as creeping capitalist tendencies, launched a campaign to root out counter-revolutionary elements. In reality, the Cultural Revolution unleashed chaos across every sector of society. Schools and universities closed, intellectuals were persecuted, many were sent to labor camps, some never to return. The country's cultural heritage became a target for Red Guards, young zealots fighting to prove their revolutionary commitment by attacking anything perceived as old or foreign. Even family ties and personal loyalties fell under suspicion. This era left deep wounds. Trust between individuals and the state was shredded. Many who had once believed in the promise of communist China became disillusioned or fearful. Millions of families were separated. Lives were uprooted. And yet, woven through the hardship was a resilience, a quiet determination among ordinary people simply to survive, to maintain dignity when dignity was often denied. By the time Mao died in 1976, China was a country adrift. The economy was moribund, with much of the population living in absolute poverty and necessities, often in short supply. Morale was low, and the legitimacy of the party itself was under intense scrutiny. The Soviet Union, once idolized as a model of socialism, now appeared stagnant and inward-looking. The United States, which had long excluded China from global affairs, was only beginning to engage through tentative diplomatic openings. Into this void stepped figures of the so-called second generation of Chinese leadership, among whom Deng Xiaoping stood out for his pragmatism and unyielding spirit. The time was ripe for change, but it was far from clear what form that change would take or whether it would succeed at all. The old guard, shaped by revolutionary struggle, found themselves at a crossroads. Some advocated for a retrenchment, a return to old certainties, while others, Deng, most prominent among them, were willing, even eager, to experiment, to look outward, to learn from a world that had long been mistrusted. Thus, the stage was set for a transformation the world had not anticipated. The next chapters in China's story would not be written in the ink of ideology alone, but in the sweat, hope, and risk of a nation learning to adapt. Before this moment could be seized, however, China and its new leaders needed to confront the weight of history that lay behind them. The poverty, the trauma, the broken trust, and the yearning for something better. It was here, in the ashes of disappointment and the embers of hope, that Deng Xiaoping would chart his course, quietly, purposefully, determined that China's next leap would not end in disaster, but in renewal. Understanding this crucible is essential to appreciating not only Deng's eventual successes, but the cautious optimism and deeply rooted fears that would define the opening of China to the world. Chapter 2. An Unyielding Spirit, the Formative Years of Deng Xiaoping. To understand the leader Deng Xiaoping would become, one must first explore the child, the student, and the young revolutionary who would grow into a colossus of Chinese politics. Deng's journey to leadership was marked not by privilege, but by hardship, intellectual curiosity, and a thirst for renewal, both personal and national. Deng Xiaoping was born in 1904 in the small rural town of Guang'an in Sichuan province. The early years of Deng's life coincided with the final collapse of the Qing dynasty and the tumultuous birth of the Republic of China. His family, though considered scholars, lived much like many others in rural China, affected by the uncertainties of a world undergoing seismic change. As the young Deng watched the mayhem that characterized China in the early 20th century, the warlord years, the encroachment of foreign powers, the struggles of ordinary peasants, he came to appreciate the depths of his country's predicament. Unlike some of his later contemporaries, Deng's education began at local schools, but his experiences quickly took on an international dimension. In the 1920s, inspired by the work-study movement, Deng journeyed to France as part of a cohort of young Chinese seeking knowledge and purpose abroad. This experience, though harsh, Deng often worked menial jobs to support himself, was formative in multiple ways. Far from home, Deng witnessed both the promise and the pitfalls of Western societies. He saw industrial might, technological innovation, but also social struggle and inequality. These early years in France would shape Deng's lifelong attitude toward learning from others, absorbing what was useful, discarding what was not. It was during his time in France that Deng joined the Chinese Communist Party, spurred first by intellectual exposure and later by direct involvement in organization and activism. Here, he met future luminaries of the revolution, such as Zhou Enlai. The experience was toughening, both ideologically and emotionally. Deng's resolve and resourcefulness became evident amidst these difficult circumstances. A quiet resilience, paired with an unflagging optimism, came to define his leadership style. Upon returning to China, Deng threw himself into the revolutionary struggle. China was on the precipice of profound upheaval as the nationalist Kuomintang and the fledgling Communist Party vied for supremacy. Deng's talent for organization and his legendary work ethic soon brought him to the attention of Mao Zedong and other key leaders. Whether on the battlefield or in political offices, Deng's reputation for getting things done, often without fanfare, contrasted with the more flamboyant, rhetorical styles of others. Yet Deng's early successes did not shield him from adversity. The Long March, the anti-Japanese war, and the civil conflict against the nationalists tested his mettle. At several points, Deng was demoted or assigned to less influential posts, particularly during periods of ideological purism or intra-party strife. But each time, Deng would bide his time, using setbacks to learn and refine his approach. What set Deng apart was his deep empathy for the common people, grounded in personal experience. Having lost children during the Cultural Revolution, served time in political exile, and seen the suffering of peasants and workers firsthand, Deng never lost sight of the human cost of policy. This empathy did not always translate into sentimentality, but it informed his fierce pragmatism. Deng once famously remarked, "It doesn't matter if a cat is black or white, so long as it catches mice." What mattered was practical results, not ideological purity. By the time the Communist Party established the People's Republic in 1949, Deng's political acumen made him an invaluable asset. In the 1950s and early 1960s, he served in several key roles, pushing forward policies intended to build a strong, stable state. Yet always, he was set apart by his willingness to challenge orthodoxy, even when it brought personal risk. Deng Xiaoping's early years tell the story of a man who was constantly learning, adapting, and enduring. Unlike leaders whose legitimacy stemmed solely from charisma or revolution, Deng's authority grew through persistence, competence, and a clear-eyed compassion for his people's struggles. These traits would become crucial as he later piloted China through the stormiest waters the country had yet faced. From the dusty roads of Sichuan to the bustling factories of France, Deng's formative years planted the seeds of innovation and empathy that would later blossom into national transformation. The young man who once labored in foreign lands would one day return to find his country desperate for renewal, a task he would undertake with the unyielding spirit that hardship had bred in him. Chapter 3. Surviving Turbulence. Deng and the Cultural Revolution. The Cultural Revolution, spanning from 1966 to 1976, was a period of unparalleled chaos in China's modern history, a decade when the foundations of society, family, and government were shaken to their core. For Deng Xiaoping, it became both a crucible and a turning point, the pain of which would forever shape his philosophy and governance. The Cultural Revolution was unleashed by Mao Zedong as a radical means to preserve the communist revolution. By purging perceived bourgeois and counter-revolutionary elements within Chinese society and the Communist Party itself. What began as a campaign to renew revolutionary zeal quickly devolved into mob rule. Red Guards, zealous youth mobilized by Mao, fanned out across the country, upending daily life, public order, and the very notions of history and personal identity. For Deng Xiaoping, who had risen to prominence within the party as a pragmatic and effective administrator, the Cultural Revolution presented an existential threat. Deng was part of the so-called pragmatist faction, leaders who advocated for economic rationality and moderate policies over ideological purity. Mao and his close ally, Jiang Qing, viewed these figures with suspicion, convinced that they represented a return to capitalist road thinking. In 1966, Deng was labeled a target. Along with fellow reformist Liu Shaoqi, he was accused of being a capitalist roader. The consequences were immediate and devastating. Deng lost his positions as General Secretary and Vice Premier, stripped of all party responsibilities. He and his family were subjected to public humiliation. His eldest son, Deng Pufang, suffered catastrophic injuries during a violent attack by Red Guards, rendering him paraplegic. For Deng, these years were marked by profound personal and political suffering, a test of endurance for both mind and spirit. Exiled to a tractor factory in the remote countryside, Deng's fate was shared by countless others. Intellectuals, teachers, government officials, and ordinary citizens who found themselves labeled as enemies of the revolution. Life during the Cultural Revolution oscillated between uncertainty, fear, and attempts to find meaning amidst chaos. For some, exile and forced labor brought quiet despair. For others, like Deng, it offered a space for reflection. In these years of hardship, Deng's pragmatic empathy deepened. He saw firsthand how well-intentioned policies could go astray, how the tyranny of ideology could inflict pain upon societies most vulnerable. At the same time, the suffering reinforced his conviction that China's future could not be built on slogans and denunciations alone. Renewal would require wisdom rooted in compassion and policy grounded in reality. As the movement wore on, many within the party began to recognize the destructive consequences of the Cultural Revolution. The economy had stagnated. Millions of citizens found their lives upended, and the unity of the party was fraying. When Premier Zhou Enlai fell ill and passed away, public mourning provided the first opening for suppressed discontent to be expressed openly, a crack in the edifice of fear. With Mao's death in 1976, the nation stood poised for change. The Gang of Four, radical leaders who sought to perpetuate the Cultural Revolution, quickly lost their hold on power. In the resulting struggle for leadership, the pragmatists gained ground, with Deng, now politically rehabilitated, emerging as their standard-bearer. Deng's rehabilitation was a gradual process, recognizing his administrative prowess and broad popularity within the party. Key figures advocated for his return. Deng was nothing if not persistent. He re-entered the political arena not with bitterness, but with a renewed sense of purpose. He did not prioritize recrimination or revenge. Instead, Deng looked forward to the possibility of reform, the possibility of healing a wounded nation. The lessons Deng drew from the Cultural Revolution would become central to his later policies. He understood the dangers of unchecked ideological zeal, the need for stability, and the value of economic modernization. Most crucially, he embraced the idea that China must seek truth from facts, a guiding principle that would underpin the seismic changes to come. For Deng, survival during the Cultural Revolution meant more than physical endurance. It meant maintaining hope amidst despair, empathy amidst suffering, and vision amidst chaos. This period of darkness gave rise to the pragmatism, resilience, and careful humanity that would come to define his leadership. When the time came for renewal, Deng was ready, not as an idealist untouched by hardship, but as a survivor determined to avoid repeating the tragedies of the past. With scars visible and hidden, Deng Xiaoping awaited his moment. He would ensure that as China moved forward, the lessons of the past were neither forgotten nor repeated, that the mistakes of one era would become the foundation for renewal in the next. Chapter 4. Reform from Within, the Birth of Socialism with Chinese Characteristics. When Deng Xiaoping returned to the apex of China's leadership in the late 1970s, neither he nor the country could afford another grand ideological experiment with unpredictable consequences. Yet the magnitude of what was required, a fundamental reshaping of China's economic and social landscape, would rival and even surpass any previous chapter in the nation's modern history. At the heart of Deng's approach was the formulation of socialism with Chinese characteristics. Rather than mimicking the Soviet Union's development path or pursuing the endless revolutions of the Maoist period, Deng proposed a distinctive trajectory that blended socialist ideals with pragmatic adaptations drawn from market economies. This was not mere sloganizing. For Deng, the only test of a policy's validity was whether it improved people's lives. The first acts of reform began in the countryside. In the village of Xiaogang, Anhui province, a quiet revolution occurred. A small group of farmers secretly divided communal land into family plots, agreeing to fulfill collective quotas but keep any surplus. This simple act, technically illegal at the time, produced astonishing results. News of this household responsibility system quietly spread, turning pilot experiments into a grassroots movement. When word reached Beijing, Deng recognized its value and used his authority to ensure its protection and ultimately national adoption. These reforms rapidly increased agricultural output, lifted millions from chronic hunger, and rekindled a sense of possibility in rural China. Deng's method was evolutionary, not revolutionary. The party permitted controlled experiments, monitored results, and scaled up successes. Rural initiatives soon gave way to broader reforms. Special economic zones, SEZs, were established along China's eastern seaboard, places like Shenzhen transforming virtually overnight from sleepy fishing villages into bustling hubs of commerce. Deng's genius lay in balancing innovation with stability. He understood the trepidation within the party, the fear that reform could erode socialist principles or destabilize political control. Thus, every policy announced was couched in familiar ideological language. Reform is the self-perfection of socialism, Deng insisted. But beneath the words, the reality was clear. Private entrepreneurship, foreign investment, and market pricing were being cautiously embraced. Not everyone was convinced. Hardliners warned of capitalist restoration and moral decay, while others anticipated chaos if economic freedoms outpaced political reform. Deng, however, drew strength from his earlier lessons: avoid dogma, adapt to circumstances, and never lose sight of the people's welfare. His ability to compromise, to lean on allies, and to maintain party unity while pushing boundaries became his signature. By the mid-1980s, China was a laboratory of change. Visible improvements, more food, rising incomes, the first glimpses of consumer abundance began to erode memories of scarcity. Yet social and economic contradictions bubbled beneath the surface. Newly affluent regions separated from stagnant interior provinces. Inequality, previously dampened by collectivism, began to grow. Corruption and speculation found fertile ground in an evolving system. Deng's model of reform from within, carefully, controlled yet bold in vision, set China on a new trajectory. Let some people get rich first, he declared, arguing that prosperity in certain areas would ultimately benefit the entire society. What mattered was not ideological consistency, but actual observable results. Seek truth from facts had become irreversibly the engine of China's awakening. Chapter 5. The Southern Tour, Navigating Economic Rebirth. By the dawn of the 1990s, China's economic opening had delivered visible benefits, yet momentum waned, and conservative resistance within the party threatened to reverse hard-won gains. Political uncertainty following the events of 1989 cast a long shadow, as did lingering doubts about embracing further reforms. At age 88, Deng Xiaoping could have retired quietly into history. Instead, he undertook a dramatic and symbolic act, the now legendary Southern Tour. In early 1992, Deng journeyed to the south of China, visiting Shenzhen, Zhuhai, and Shanghai. His message was clear: reform and opening up must continue. Deng's charisma and conviction were on full display during this journey. While official media were initially hesitant to report on his activities, word spread quickly among officials and citizens alike. In candid discussions with local leaders, workers, and entrepreneurs, Deng reinforced a simple point: development is the hard truth. He lambasted hesitation and inertia, warning against the complacency that could allow China to slide back into poverty and isolation. The tour galvanized a new round of reforms. Local leaders in the south, emboldened by Deng's backing, accelerated market experiments and infrastructure development. Investment, both foreign and domestic, soared. The once skeptical party center, seeing the outpouring of support for Deng, recommitted itself to economic liberalization. The Southern Tour also marked a generational transfer of energy. Young Chinese, no longer defined by the fears of famine and class struggle, began to dream of prosperity and self-advancement. Cities buzzed with optimism. New businesses, technology parks, and stock exchanges sprang up. Factories hummed, and millions migrated in search of opportunity. There was another, quieter lesson in Deng's actions: the importance of flexibility and humility in leadership. Despite his immense power, Deng was never afraid to admit errors or adjust course. Reform is China's second revolution, he declared, acknowledging not just the magnitude of what had been accomplished, but the willingness to challenge one's assumptions. Yet the era was not without cost. The toll of breakneck growth became visible. Environmental degradation, labor unrest, and social dislocation. Incomes soared for some, stagnated for others. The contradictions of reform deepened. As the country grew wealthier, new questions of fairness, justice, and meaning arose. Still, to most, Deng's gamble had paid off. The Southern Tour restored faith in China's future. It marked the point at which the logic of opening to the world became irreversible. A new consensus for a society once taught to fear foreign influence. Deng's vision, executed in the twilight of his years, ensured that China would never again turn its back on engagement and innovation. Chapter 6. Shaking the World: How Reform Changed China's Place Globally. The ripple effects of Deng Xiaoping's policies soon extended far beyond China's borders. What began as a pragmatic experiment in modernization became a global phenomenon. Within little more than a generation, China transformed from a largely agrarian society into one of the world's great economic powers. Early on, opening China meant overcoming decades of mutual suspicion. Deng understood the importance of reaching out first to neighbors in Asia, then to the world beyond. He championed foreign investment, technology transfer, and trade, all the while insisting on China's independence and right to set its course. International businesses, long wary of risks, found new incentives, legal protections, and immense opportunities within China's burgeoning markets. Diplomatically, China embraced a policy of peaceful development. Deng insisted that China hide its brilliance and bide its time, focusing on internal strength rather than grandstanding abroad. The country joined the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and gradually normalized relations with major powers, including the United States, with formal diplomatic ties cemented in 1979. As factories multiplied and exports surged, the world woke up to the China miracle. Western consumers bought goods labeled "Made in China." Supply chains shifted and global prices responded. At home, millions were lifted out of extreme poverty and urban skylines soared. Cultural exchanges flourished as Chinese students and tourists ventured overseas, carrying with them stories of change and ambition. But success brought new scrutiny and challenges. How would China manage its integration into a world order shaped by norms and values very different from its own? Questions of human rights, intellectual property, and strategic competition surfaced. The party, still wary of losing political control, set strict boundaries even as it welcomed economic influence. For ordinary Chinese, the world became accessible in unprecedented ways. Access to satellite television, foreign books, and the internet fueled curiosity and sometimes anxiety about China's place in the world. Pride in national achievements mingled with the undercurrent of unease about what might be lost in the pursuit of modernity. Through it all, Deng Xiaoping's realist approach remained a touchstone. China would proceed cautiously, welcoming the benefits of openness, but resisting the pressures to conform entirely to external models. The country's emergence as a global power was not just an economic story. It was the affirmation of an ancient civilization's adaptability and determination. Chapter 7. Legacies and Contradictions, Balancing Progress and Pain. Deng's reforms unleashed extraordinary dynamism, but they also exposed contradictions that continue to shape China's society and self-understanding. On one side was progress. Poverty rates plummeted, literacy soared, and opportunities expanded. Where once hopelessness reigned, there was now a rising middle class, unprecedented educational attainment, and life expectancy gains. For countless families, the Deng era meant a better, fuller life. Yet, for many, the whirlwind of change brought pain and uncertainty. The collapse of the iron rice bowl system, the guarantee of lifetime employment, housing, and welfare, left millions feeling vulnerable and adrift. Rural-urban divides widened. Some regions prospered while others languished. Corruption, a byproduct of rapid economic liberalization and weak legal oversight, corroded public trust. Perhaps no issue cast a longer shadow than the question of political reform. While Deng was willing to experiment boldly in economics, he remained deeply cautious in politics. The events of 1989 underscored the limits of openness and the party's fierce determination to maintain order. For many intellectuals, students, and activists, this period exposed the costs of prioritizing stability over freedom. The trauma remains a matter of public silence, even as the upward march endures. Amid these contradictions, Deng's legacy is both celebrated and contested. He is revered for his achievements, yet some lament the path not taken, a China more politically open, more equal, less anxious about its future. The reforms, for all their material gains, did not resolve the deepest questions of meaning, identity and justice facing a society in rapid transition. Deng knew change had its costs. He spoke often of pacing reform, crossing the river by feeling the stones. For every step forward, there were risks, setbacks, and the need to adjust. His gift was to recognize not just what was possible, but what was necessary for China as it was, and not merely as it wished to be. Chapter 8. Beyond Deng, the enduring impact on modern China. As the 20th century drew to a close, Deng Xiaoping's era officially ended, but its imprint on China's future remained indelible. The leaders who followed, Jiang Zemin, Hu Jintao, Xi Jinping, carried forward the legacy of reform and opening, each adapting the vision to meet new challenges and opportunities. The nation Deng helped mold was no longer isolated or stagnant. China's cities became global metropolises. Its universities attracted worldwide talent. Its entrepreneurs reimagined entire industries. Underneath the surface, the contradictions and tensions of reform persisted, a model of development that prized growth above all, a society acutely aware of both its strengths and its vulnerabilities. Internationally, China is now a central player, its ambitions and anxieties, its innovations and uncertainties, impacting every corner of the world. Questions remain. How will China balance prosperity with fairness, modernization with tradition, strength with humility? Will the lessons Deng drew from decades of trial and error, pragmatism, patience, adaptability, endure in a new era marked by global uncertainty? For ordinary Chinese, Deng's reforms mean choices their ancestors could scarcely imagine: where to live and work, what to study, how to envision the future. The legacy is not just material, but profoundly personal. A generation empowered to dream, achieve, and sometimes dissent. Deng once remarked, "To get rich is glorious." The brilliance of his leadership was recognizing that glory could take many forms. Not merely money or power, but the dignity of self-determination, the freedom to engage with the world, and above all, the wisdom to learn from both success and failure. History will continue to debate Deng Xiaoping's choices: the boldness, the caution, the compromises, and the costs. What is certain is that his era opened not just China's doors to the world, but a new chapter in the enduring story of a people striving to shape their own destiny. If you found this video helpful, inspiring, or entertaining, don't forget to hit that like button. And if you're new here, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on future content. Your support means the world. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.